What if I told you China's most advanced missiles were filled with water? Not fuel, water, asterisk asterisk. And that's just the beginning of a shocking trail of corruption, fake firepower, and weapons that fail when it matters most. From Iran to Pakistan, Chinese arms are collapsing in real combat, exposing a terrifying truth the world wasn't supposed to see. For decades, Chinese products were mocked across the globe. Cheap, fragile, disposable. But few imagined that this reputation would eventually follow China into the world of warfare. Now the truth is leaking out. Not only are their consumer goods falling apart, so are their weapons. In the battlefields of Pakistan, Myanmar, and most recently Iran, Chinese arms have been tested. And in many cases, they have failed. Miserably. This isn't just about faulty guns or malfunctioning drones. It's about a much larger story. One that reveals how China, desperate to rise as a global military supplier, flooded the defense markets of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East over the last 2 decades. Their pitch was simple. Western weapons are expensive or unavailable due to sanctions. Russian arms are costly and politically complicated. But Chinese weapons? Affordable, accessible, and supposedly advanced. For many nations under pressure, that offer was hard to refuse. Countries like Iran and Pakistan were boxed in by Western hostility and diplomatic isolation. They didn't have the luxury of shopping around. Iran is the perfect example. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, its military was a shining example of Western power. American-made fighter jets like the F-14 Tomcat once roared across its skies. British tanks rolled through its deserts. But when the revolution flipped the country's alliances overnight, the West slammed its doors shut. Sanctions, embargoes, isolation. Iran had to look elsewhere. Russia was one possibility, but Iranian leaders had long been suspicious of Moscow. Old historical scars. And Russian weapons weren't exactly cheap or always dependable. Then came China, with open arms, lower prices, and big promises. Promises that are now beginning to crack under pressure. Iran wasn't alone in leaning on China's growing arms industry. Across the border, Pakistan found itself on a strikingly similar path. During the Cold War, Pakistan was a close ally of the United States. It received a steady stream of Western-made weapons, especially as it played a central role in countering Soviet influence in Afghanistan. American tanks, jets, and support systems flowed into Islamabad as long as its strategic value remained high. But in 1998, everything changed. Pakistan conducted its first nuclear tests. The world took notice, and the United States responded with forceful sanctions. Practically overnight, the military support dried up. Spare parts vanished. Contracts were frozen. And a critical lifeline was cut. Left in the cold, Pakistan needed a new partner. One that wouldn't judge its nuclear ambitions. One that could deliver weapons fast, cheap, and in bulk. China stepped forward without hesitation, not just as a supplier, but as a strategic partner. From that moment on, Pakistan's arsenal began transforming. Chinese fighter jets began replacing aging American models. Tanks rolled in from across the Himalayas. Missiles, radar systems, and even naval vessels poured into Pakistani hands. By the mid-2000s, China was no longer just one of many military partners. It had become Pakistan's primary source of military power. And Beijing didn't stop at supplying. It started boasting. Each new weapon system China released came with bold claims. Their missiles, they said, had longer range. Their jets, they insisted, were more agile and cost-effective than anything in the West. In the 1990s and early 2000s, China heavily marketed its JF-17 Thunder fighter jet. It was affordable, homegrown, and designed with close cooperation from Pakistan itself. It quickly became the backbone of the Pakistani Air Force. Then came the big leap. In the 2010s, China rolled out the sleek, stealthy J-20 fighter, a fifth-generation warplane that Beijing claimed could rival the American F-22 Raptor or even the highly advanced F-35. At the same time, they unveiled advanced anti-ship missiles designed to threaten carrier groups and change the balance of naval power. The message was clear. China was not just catching up. It was aiming to leap ahead. But as the dust now begins to settle, many are starting to ask a troubling question. Were these weapons as advanced as China claimed? Or was the world sold an illusion? Chinese defense firms kept feeding the fantasy. Each year brought another headline, another unveiling. Another miracle weapon: precision-guided bombs, advanced radar systems, hypersonic missiles. Beijing flooded the global stage with announcements, each more impressive than the last. Their pitch never changed: Western performance, Eastern price. For struggling nations under sanctions or pressure, it was a golden offer. Iran and Pakistan were at the top of that list, both locked out of Western markets, both desperate to modernize their forces, both seduced by China's promises. Tens of billions of dollars flowed out of Tehran and Islamabad. Fighter jets were paraded on runways. Missile launchers rolled past in military parades. On paper, they now had cutting-edge technology. There was even confidence. Some believed this new arsenal could not only defend their homelands, but actively challenge rivals like Israel and India. But that confidence was built on sand. Because when these Chinese-made systems were finally put to the test in real combat, the results were not just disappointing. They were disastrous. Weapons jammed. Missiles veered off course. Entire systems went offline when they were needed most. What was sold as revolutionary turned out to be unreliable. In many cases, dangerously so. The harsh truth was now undeniable. Much of what China sold to its allies was little more than glorified junk. In this video, we're going to take you deep inside the collapse. We'll show you how supposedly advanced Chinese weaponry failed under real-world pressure. We'll expose the truth behind China's so-called defense innovation, much of which is copied, reverse-engineered, or outright stolen from other nations. And most critically, we'll explain why the year 2025 could mark the unraveling of China's military ambitions altogether. If you follow geopolitics, you already know the fault lines. Iran and Israel have been locked in a shadow war for years. Spy missions, proxy battles, cyber attacks. The pressure's been building for decades, fueled by Iran's nuclear pursuits and its financial and military backing of groups like Hezbollah. But in early 2025, the gloves came off. On June 13th, long-simmering hostility exploded into full-scale war. And that's when the myth of Chinese military power began to fall apart in real time. It began in the dead of night. Without warning, Israel launched a massive preemptive strike. The objective was chillingly clear: cripple Iran's military infrastructure in a single blow. No second chances. No drawn-out war. As Iranian airspace lay silent under a blanket of darkness, a squadron of Israeli F-35 Adir stealth jets pierced through the sky undetected. These were not ordinary warplanes. These were state-of-the-art, fifth-generation fighters engineered specifically for strikes like this. Iran's top defense systems should have seen them coming. But they didn't. Russian-built S-300 batteries went dark within seconds. Radar stations designed to protect the capital and key nuclear facilities were obliterated before a single warning could be sent. And it wasn't just the Russian systems that failed. Rumors now swirling from deep within Iranian command suggest something even more embarrassing. The Chinese-made JY-10 anti-air command system never even lit up. It was supposed to be one of China's most advanced radars, able to track up to 100 targets simultaneously across an 800-kilometer range. A high-tech force multiplier that Beijing sold to its allies as a game-changing shield. But when the moment came, it didn't track a single jet. Not one. It simply sat silent as high-speed anti-radiation missiles, known as HARMs, zeroed in on every radar station with surgical precision. In minutes, Iran's eyes and ears were gone. Radar systems were fried. Communications were jammed. Missile operators stood in bunkers, staring at blank screens. No targets, no coordinates, no idea what was happening above them. Then the second wave came. Dozens of Israeli F-15I Strike Eagles and F-16I Sufas screamed in behind the stealth jets. Armed with precision-guided bombs and long-range cruise missiles, they went to work. They weren't just bombing empty airfields or symbolic targets. They hit the core, top military command centers, nuclear scientists, missile depots, air bases, radar hubs. Within a few hours, Iran's strategic military backbone was broken. It was swift, brutal, precise. And for China, it was an unfolding disaster. Beijing had spent years hyping its systems, training foreign forces to rely on them, selling the narrative that Chinese-made technology was not only affordable, but unstoppable. Now that illusion was collapsing in real time on the global stage. Before the sun even rose over Tehran, China's state-run media began scrambling. Press releases, vague statements, carefully edited footage, anything to control the damage, anything to avoid the headline the world was already thinking, that China's military exports were a fraud. And this was only the beginning. As the smoke still rose from smoldering radar stations and flattened command bunkers, Beijing went into full damage control. Official Chinese state media and its affiliated defense websites launched a coordinated campaign to spin the disaster. Within hours, they were publishing bold claims. One headline boasted that Chinese air defense systems in Iran had achieved an 80% success rate. Another claimed they had detected and neutralized Israeli stealth jets with ease. But the facts on the ground told a very different story. Most of those systems were vaporized before they could even lock onto a single incoming target. Radars never activated. Launch platforms were destroyed in their silos. Control rooms were reduced to twisted steel. The so-called 80% success rate wasn't just a lie. It was an insult to the destruction Iran had just suffered. And it wasn't the first time China and its close allies had tried to rewrite battlefield failures. Just a month earlier, during a brief but intense clash between Pakistan and India in May 2025, pro-Chinese and Pakistani accounts filled social media with claims that Chinese-backed Pakistani forces had shot down multiple Indian Rafale jets. There was just one problem. No wreckage, no satellite confirmation, no evidence. They used the same playbook in Iran. Within hours of the Israeli strike, Chinese-controlled accounts began flooding the internet with so-called proof that multiple Israeli F-35I stealth jets had been taken down. Some even claimed that F-16s had been intercepted mid-air. A particular image of a supposed Israeli jet wreckage went viral. It looked dramatic. Burning metal, twisted parts. Victory for Iranian defenses. But there was one issue. It was fake. Experts quickly identified it as AI-generated. The metadata didn't match any real-world event. Shadows were inconsistent. Details didn't align with any known aircraft. No one ever found the wreckage. No crash sites. No damaged planes. No pilot remains. And now, even a full week after the ceasefire, not a single piece of verifiable evidence has surfaced. Meanwhile, the reality on the ground was far more sobering. Iran, unable to rely on its billion-dollar Chinese defense grid, was forced to fall back on World War II-era tactics. Soldiers in bunkers began desperately firing anti-aircraft guns blindly into the night sky. It was a last-ditch act of desperation. Tracer rounds lit up the darkness, but hit nothing. Israeli jets flew far above, untouched and unchallenged. By the time the sun rose over Iran, it was over. Israel had done in a single night what even their most optimistic generals had predicted would take several days of grinding warfare. And the rest of the world was watching, especially China's other clients. Their trust in Chinese weapons was already strained. Now, it was beginning to collapse. In the aftermath of the Israeli strike, Iran's political leadership was left stunned. Those who survived, anyway. Key military figures, nuclear scientists, and senior defense officials had either been eliminated in the strikes or were now in hiding. But the shock ran deeper than physical losses. It was psychological. For years, Tehran had boasted that its air defense systems were world-class, an impenetrable shield built with Chinese support and tailored to resist even the most sophisticated Western assaults. But in the silence that followed the attack, the truth finally emerged. A senior Iranian military officer, speaking anonymously to a foreign outlet, reportedly confessed what the regime didn't want to admit publicly, that their air defenses were, in his words, advanced only for display. Beautiful on posters, deadly only in theory. They weren't built for real war. They were built for parade grounds and propaganda clips. Naturally, one would expect Iran to be furious, publicly outraged at China for supplying them with systems that crumbled like cardboard under real pressure. But instead of anger, Iran did something no one quite expected. They doubled down on the very source of their failure. New intelligence reports suggest that Iran is now preparing to spend tens of billions more on Chinese military hardware. Yes, after everything that just happened. And they're not wasting time. Just days after the United States conducted a series of precision airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, a delegation of senior Iranian military officials quietly flew to Beijing. Their mission was simple: rebuild what was lost. And fast. But instead of reassessing their dependence on Chinese systems, they leaned in deeper. While in China, Iranian officials reportedly expressed serious interest in purchasing the J-10C multi-role fighter jet, a so-called fourth-generation warplane that China claims is the rival of Western equivalents. Why the J-10C? Because Iran is in urgent need of restoring its shattered air defenses and trying to re-establish control over its skies. The irony? Iran never truly had air superiority to begin with. What it had was the illusion of strength. Now it's clinging to that illusion even more tightly, hoping that a new batch of Chinese jets can erase the sting of a military humiliation the world just witnessed. But history has already shown how this story ends. And yet, Tehran seems willing to make the same mistake. Again, the bitter truth is this. As long as Iran continues to rely on Chinese weapons, it will never achieve true air superiority. Not now, not ever. But Tehran seems unwilling, or perhaps unable, to accept that. With no hope of negotiating arms deals with the United States, and with much of Europe still enforcing decades-old sanctions, Iran sees China not as a choice, but as the only door left open. At one point, Iranian defense officials hoped to pivot to Russia. The Kremlin's Su-35 fighter jets were considered a serious upgrade over Chinese models. But that option quickly vanished. Why? Because Moscow is in survival mode. With its full attention locked on the brutal war in Ukraine, Russia is hoarding every aircraft it has. Its factories are working overtime just to replace wartime losses. The idea of shipping off modern warplanes to Tehran right now is simply off the table. Then there's the price. Russian jets, particularly the Su-35s, don't come cheap. And Iran's economy, already battered by sanctions and internal mismanagement, isn't exactly flush with cash. Enter China. Again, Chinese jets are significantly cheaper, easier to acquire. And for desperate buyers, that affordability outweighs their spotty performance record. But here's where it gets even more absurd. One of the main reasons Iran still believes in Chinese firepower is because of a misleading narrative from another battlefield altogether. The recent four-day war between India and Pakistan in May 2025 became a goldmine for Chinese military propaganda. While most of the world was focused on ceasefire negotiations and border tensions, Chinese media outlets went into overdrive. Carefully crafted headlines, doctored videos, fake combat footage. They painted a picture of Pakistani victory, made possible by Chinese-made jets. They claimed Pakistan's Air Force had successfully gone head-to-head with India's far superior Rafale fighters, and won. To the casual observer, the story seemed plausible. It was repeated so often, with such confidence, that even international analysts began to hesitate. The effect was powerful. For a brief moment, stock prices for Dassault, the French manufacturer of the Rafale jets, actually dipped. Not because of anything that happened on the battlefield, but because of what was said online. And that's the dangerous part. Chinese propaganda isn't just meant to save face. It's meant to rewrite reality. And for regimes like Iran's, caught between desperation and denial, these illusions are sometimes easier to believe than the cold, hard truth that their enemies are flying above them, and their so-called allies are selling them wings that won't even leave the ground. Ready for Section 8 when you are. This momentum is building perfectly into a powerful conclusion or a shift in regional focus, depending on your direction. The myth of Chinese air superiority reached its peak during the 2025 conflict between India and Pakistan. Chinese state media went all in, crediting Pakistan's so-called victories almost entirely to one aircraft, the J-10C. According to their version of events, Pakistani pilots flying Chinese-made J-10Cs managed to shoot down multiple Indian Rafale jets. These were not just routine victories. They were painted as David versus Goliath moments. French-built Rafales are among the most advanced fourth-generation fighters in the world. Fast, agile, combat-tested. Yet China's narrative had them falling from the sky like paper planes. There was just one problem. It was all fake. Independent analysts from around the world, using satellite imagery, flight data, and field reports, thoroughly debunked these claims. Not a single Rafale was downed. Indian forces reported 0 confirmed aircraft losses. But facts didn't stop the fiction. Within days of the online propaganda storm, Chinese state television began airing a 2-part documentary glorifying the J-10Cs development. It was rolled out with patriotic music, dramatic reenactments, and glowing praise for the Communist Party. The series is still being broadcast regularly on National Memory, a daily program designed to celebrate China's military and political achievements. To Beijing, the J-10C isn't just a fighter jet. It's a symbol, a product of national pride, a tool of influence. And despite its questionable battlefield record, Iran remains deeply interested. In fact, Tehran's fascination with the J-10C didn't start this year. It goes back nearly 2 decades. In 2015, long before the current crisis, Iran came close to signing a massive deal for 150 J-10Cs. The intent was clear. Replace aging American aircraft from the pre-1979 era with a modern fleet that could challenge regional rivals. But the deal collapsed. The reason? Economics. China demanded payment in hard currency. Dollars, euros, something stable. But Iran, strangled by sanctions and short on reserves, offered barter payments in crude oil and natural gas instead. Beijing wasn't interested. On top of that, the United Nations arms embargo on Iran was still in effect. Even if a payment plan had been agreed on, the international legal roadblocks were impossible to ignore. It wasn't until 2020 that the situation shifted. The embargo was lifted. Talks resumed. But the tone had changed. Iran was no longer in a position to negotiate for 150 jets. The new discussions focused on a far smaller order, just 36 aircraft. Even then, the same problems persisted. Payment methods, currency shortages, delivery timelines. Years passed. Negotiations dragged. Promises were made. And still, no jets arrived. Now, in 2025, after the destruction of Iran's air defenses and a military humiliation witnessed by the entire world, Tehran is once again knocking on China's door. The question is no longer whether Iran wants the J-10C. It's whether buying it again will solve anything, or just lead to the same disappointment. On a grander scale, now, the situation has shifted once again. With China's massive and ever-growing hunger for energy, a new barter deal between Tehran and Beijing suddenly looks very likely. And here's the twist. On June 24, 2025, the United States quietly adjusted its sanctions policy, officially permitting China to resume purchases of Iranian oil without direct penalties. Just like that, Iran's biggest obstacle was gone. The embargo that once froze military deals, crippled banking channels, and isolated Iran from the arms market no longer applies. At least not when it comes to selling oil to China. That single policy change lit the green light Iran had been waiting on for nearly a decade. Now, with oil barrels ready to flow east and Chinese fighter jets waiting on Beijing's airstrips, the long-delayed deal for J-10Cs may finally go through. And make no mistake, Iran isn't just looking for a few planes. Despite the humiliation it suffered just days ago, despite the total collapse of its air defense network, despite the global embarrassment of trusting Chinese technology, Tehran is still ready to buy every piece of Chinese military equipment it can get its hands on. And perhaps even more disturbing than Iran's blind loyalty is China's response to the failure. Rather than accept any responsibility, Beijing did what it does best. Redirect, deflect, spin. Chinese state-affiliated media outlets quickly shifted the blame. Their new target? Russia. According to them, the real problem wasn't the Chinese systems. It was the Russian ones. Specifically, the S-300 surface-to-air missile batteries supplied by Moscow. In an almost laughable twist, Chinese reports claimed the outcome might have been different if Iran had relied more heavily on Chinese-made air defense systems instead of splitting its trust between suppliers. But here's the part they conveniently leave out. Those Chinese systems were already central to Iran's defense network. The JY-10 radars. The C-2 missile coordination systems. These weren't backup units. They were supposed to be the first line of detection. They were designed to track incoming aircraft, identify threats, and feed that data into Iran's command centers, which then would trigger interception responses, either through Chinese missiles or Russian platforms. But the Chinese radars didn't just fail. They never even turned on. There was no detection, no alert, no communication, nothing. The entire network failed at its first critical task, spotting the enemy. And now, as if none of that happened, Iran is preparing to buy more of the same. As the dust settled over the ruins of Iran's shattered air defense systems, The blame game went global. Some Chinese social media users jumped into the fray, suggesting that the real issue wasn't the weapons, it was the operators. If Chinese personnel had been running the systems, they claimed, things would have ended very differently. That may be true, or just another layer of damage control. Because even behind closed doors in Beijing, officials were reportedly stunned at just how catastrophically their weapons had failed in live combat. And that kind of embarrassment doesn't go unnoticed. China and Iran aren't just casual arms partners. They're part of a growing strategic alliance that includes economic, military, and diplomatic cooperation against U.S.-led influence in the region. Which means when things go sideways, face must be saved. Iran was hoping for a bold, public show of solidarity. Maybe a formal statement. Maybe visible military support. But Beijing, as usual, chose a quieter path, one that's much harder to track. On June 14th, with Israeli airstrikes still raining down on Iranian territory, something strange began to happen in the skies over Central Asia. At least 5 Boeing 747 cargo planes took off from various Chinese airfields, each flying a peculiar westward path. Their route, not the usual direct route over India or the Middle East. Instead, they wove through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, steering clear of U.S. or NATO-aligned airspace. And just as they approached Iranian airspace, they vanished from radar. All 5 flights had officially listed Luxembourg as their destination. But not a single one was seen entering European airspace. No landing logs. No satellite imagery. No visual confirmation. Gone. But not really. Military analysts quickly picked up on a disturbing pattern. These same Boeing 747 freighters have long been used to deliver military-grade cargo, especially by China. And if history is any guide, this isn't the first time Beijing has quietly armed its allies without ever leaving a fingerprint. From North Korea to Venezuela, from Syria to Sudan, China has a well-documented track record of delivering covert support to regimes and militias fighting Western influence. And with Iran now reeling, desperate to rebuild, and more humiliated than ever, the timing of these ghost flights is no coincidence. Whatever was on those planes, one thing's clear. China wasn't going to let its image or its ally collapse completely. At least, not without delivering some kind of backdoor fix. China's covert support for Iran isn't just a one-time bailout. It's a calculated move in a much larger geopolitical chess game. You see, both Beijing and Tehran share a deep resentment toward the current U.S.-led world order. They're united by a common vision, a multipolar world, where American influence is replaced by a patchwork of regional powers, many of them authoritarian, and many of them armed by China. So helping Iran save face? It's not just an act of goodwill. It's part of a long-term strategy to tighten their alliance and undermine the West at the same time. And let's be real, China had plenty of reasons to make amends. Nearly every Chinese weapon system used by Iran failed spectacularly in live combat. Radars didn't power on. Command systems didn't link. Missiles missed. The whole fiasco was one giant PR nightmare. But those mysterious 747 cargo flights? They may have been Beijing's quiet way of patching things up, an unspoken apology delivered in crates. And according to leaked intelligence intercepts, those crates may have contained more than just radar parts or guidance systems. Some reports suggest ballistic missile materials, the kind that can only be sourced through high-level state cooperation, were on board. If true, this would be a blatant violation of international law. Openly shipping that kind of hardware could place China directly in the crosshairs of U.S. sanctions, something Beijing is currently desperate to avoid while juggling economic recovery at home. And that's exactly why those planes went dark. As they approached Iranian airspace, each flight switched off its transponders, vanishing from commercial radar and leaving behind 0 digital fingerprints. The airline initially linked to the flights, Luxembourg-based Cargolux, quickly stepped forward to deny any involvement. In a statement published on both its website and social media channels, Cargolux insisted, "None of our aircraft operate in or near Iranian airspace. Any suggestion otherwise is false and misleading." Which leaves one burning question. If not Cargolux, then who? Was it a Chinese military front company using forged civilian flight manifests? Or a shadow operator working under state cover? One thing's certain, Someone went to extraordinary lengths to get Chinese military hardware into Iran without anyone officially taking the blame. And this act of silent support could reshape the entire balance of power in the Middle East. Here's the part that's truly astonishing. Iran could have avoided the humiliation of its failed air defense system completely. The warnings were already there, in plain sight. They just chose to ignore them. Because just weeks before Iran's disaster, a strikingly similar scenario played out in Pakistan. And guess what? It also involved Chinese-made weaponry. It all started with a chilling terrorist attack in the peaceful Indian town of Pahalgam. 26 innocent people were killed, among them women and foreign tourists. India was furious. The public demanded blood, and the government didn't hesitate. Within hours, Indian investigators linked the attackers to militant groups based inside Pakistan, sparking a firestorm of outrage across the country. What followed was Operation Sindoor, a swift, precision military response unlike anything the region had seen in years. Indian fighter jets and cruise missiles were launched in coordinated waves, targeting not only the militant camps, but also Pakistani military installations suspected of aiding them. But here's where it gets deeply relevant, especially for Iran. The entire strike force had to fly directly through Pakistan's Chinese-built air defense systems. These were the same Chinese radars, the same missile batteries, the same integrated systems that Beijing sold as game-changing tools for modern warfare. And yet, India's missiles sliced right through them. No early detection, no meaningful interception. Nothing worked. In fact, some of the radar stations reportedly never even picked up the incoming targets until the explosions had already begun. It was an absolute failure. And this wasn't a secret. Military analysts across the world took notice. The Indian Air Force didn't just dodge Pakistani defenses. It exposed them. This was the red flag Iran should have paid attention to. And yet, just weeks later, Tehran found itself in exactly the same trap, armed with Chinese weapons that looked good on paper but collapsed under real-world pressure. If Iran had studied what happened in Pakistan, it could have reevaluated its reliance on Chinese defense tech. It might have delayed the radar deployment. It might have upgraded its command networks. It might have saved lives. But instead, it walked blindly into the same setup and paid the price. Now the question isn't just about failure. It's about trust. Can China really be the arms supplier to power a new anti-Western axis when its technology keeps falling apart? Or are its weapons just expensive symbols of a rising superpower, not tools that can win modern wars? Here's where things get even more troubling. Because Iran is not the only country putting its national defense in Chinese hands. Just look across the border to Pakistan. Today, nearly 80% of Pakistan's major military hardware comes directly from China. That includes fighter jets, attack drones, main battle tanks, naval vessels, and an entire network of sophisticated air defense systems. This is not just a few military imports. It's a full-blown military dependence. At the heart of Pakistan's Air Force are two flagship aircraft. First, the JF-17 Thunder, jointly developed by Pakistan and China. And more recently, the J-10CE fighter jet, a multi-role warplane that Beijing promotes as a cheaper alternative to Western jets like the F-16. But it does not stop at the skies. Pakistan has also equipped its military with Chinese-made drones, many of which are modeled after American systems, but come at a fraction of the price. Its navy has purchased modern warships, and its ground forces now rely heavily on Chinese armored vehicles. But perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle is Pakistan's air defense. To guard its skies, Pakistan invested in the HQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missile system, built by China and often compared to the American Patriot or the Russian S-300. Chinese state media loves to present the HQ-9 as a world-class system. And on paper, it certainly sounds impressive. The version sold to Pakistan, called the HQ-9P, claims a strike range of around 125 kilometers. Upgraded versions, like the HQ-9B, supposedly stretch that range to 250 or even 300 kilometers. Beijing advertises each HQ-9 battery as a complete ecosystem. That includes advanced search radars, passive electronically scanned arrays, tracking radars, command and control vehicles, and dozens of launcher trucks. One battery can reportedly deploy up to 48 launch platforms, carrying a total of 192 missiles. And according to the brochures, this system can intercept everything: fighter jets, stealth drones, cruise missiles, even ballistic threats. On paper, that sounds like a shield straight out of a sci-fi movie. But in practice? Well, we already saw what happened in Iran. And we saw it in Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. Despite all the shiny marketing, these Chinese defense systems did not deliver. Now imagine what this means for Pakistan, a country facing both internal instability and constant tensions with a nuclear-armed neighbor. A country that has built its entire defense doctrine around the assumption that Chinese weapons will work when it counts. But what if they do not? What if, in a moment of real conflict, the HQ-9 batteries fail to intercept incoming missiles? What if the radars freeze? What if command vehicles go blind, just like they did in Tehran? That is not just a technical issue. It is a national security crisis. And now both Tehran and Islamabad are being forced to ask a question they should have asked years ago. Can Beijing really be trusted to defend their skies? Or have they simply traded independence for dependency, betting their survival on weapons that look powerful but crack under pressure? It wasn't just the HQ-9 missile system that Pakistan put its faith in. In recent years, Islamabad had taken things a step further. They created a full-spectrum air defense grid called CLIAD, short for Comprehensive Layered Integrated Air Defense. This wasn't just a military upgrade. It was a bold claim that Pakistan now had one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in South Asia. CLIAD was designed to operate like an interlocking shield. At its core was the HQ-9, meant to handle long-range threats. Supporting it were HQ-16 missiles for mid-range interception. Then came the HQ-7 and FM-90 systems to manage close-range threats. And to round it all off, FN, 6-man portable air defense systems were issued to mobile units for low-altitude threats. On paper, this sounded like a near-impenetrable barrier. A Chinese-made umbrella of missile systems, radars, and launchers. High-tech, highly coordinated, and highly advertised by Beijing. Xi Jinping himself had sold this vision of a secure, modern Pakistan, protected by Chinese innovation and technology. But when reality arrived, the illusion shattered. May 8, 2025. Just 15 days after the massacre at Pahalgam, India struck back. It was early morning. Dawn had barely broken. Without any public warning, the Indian military launched a rapid and surgical strike across multiple sectors inside Pakistani territory. What came to be known as Operation Sindoor unfolded with stunning precision. And more importantly, with no resistance from Pakistan's defenses. According to official Indian briefings, the entire operation lasted just 25 minutes. Yet within that short window, Indian forces successfully struck at least 9 major targets. Not random sites. These were deliberately chosen. Training camps, intelligence hubs, militant group headquarters. Primarily those linked to Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, the very groups India held responsible for the killings in Kashmir. And Pakistan, caught off guard, scrambling. Their much-hyped Chinese air defense systems? Silent, useless, powerless. Not a single Indian aircraft was shot down. Not one incoming missile was intercepted. The CLIAD network, built and advertised as a layered shield, failed to detect, react, or respond in time. The aftermath was devastating, not just in physical damage, but in trust. Trust in Beijing's promises. Trust in Chinese military hardware. And trust in the illusion of protection that CLIAD was supposed to offer. Because what good is a layered defense if every layer breaks under pressure? Now both Pakistan and Iran have witnessed it. 2 different battlefields. Same supplier. Same outcome. Chinese defense systems that look impressive at parades but collapse in actual war. And behind closed doors, military officials from across the region are asking one unavoidable question. If these are China's best systems, what happens when they are tested by someone even stronger than India? One of the first and most devastating blows came at Chunian Air Base, located just south of Lahore. This base was critical for one reason. It hosted Pakistan's YC-8E anti-stealth radar, a Chinese-made system specifically designed to detect incoming aircraft with low radar signatures. But in war, the best systems mean nothing if your enemy knows exactly how to neutralize them. As the Indian jets approached, they fired a coordinated barrage of anti-radiation missiles. weapons engineered to home in on radar signals and destroy them at the source. The YC-8E radar didn't last a minute. The moment it lit up, it became a glowing target. One direct hit. And with it, Pakistan's early warning capability was blinded. Almost simultaneously, Indian units struck again. This time, the targets were HQ-9 missile batteries, China's prized long-range air defense systems that had been strategically positioned near major cities and military installations across Pakistan. But these strikes weren't improvised. They were pre-planned, precise, and executed with brutal efficiency. In the days before the operation, the Indian Army had secretly positioned BrahMos cruise missiles along the border. These supersonic weapons are stealthy, fast, and devastating. And when the order came, they flew low and fast, skimming the terrain to evade detection. Their destination: HQ-9 batteries near cities like Lahore. The same type of batteries Iran had placed around key nuclear sites. Pakistan's forces panicked. Within seconds, anti-aircraft guns and short-range missile systems were activated. They scrambled to intercept the incoming BrahMos missiles. But it was too late. Every countermeasure failed. Not a single Indian missile was intercepted. Not one. Indian reports later confirmed that every BrahMos missile hit its intended target. And independent assessments, including satellite imagery and foreign intel, found zero evidence to dispute it. The shock wasn't just in the destruction. It was in the speed, the accuracy, the total breakdown of a system that had cost Pakistan billions and had been sold by Beijing as state-of-the-art. And by the time Pakistan's fighter jets, including American-built F-16s and Chinese-made J-10Cs, finally scrambled into the sky, it was already over. Indian jets were leaving, mission accomplished. They came in fast, struck hard, left before Pakistan even knew what was happening. It was a military performance that embarrassed not just Pakistan, but China, too. Because every destroyed radar, every disabled battery, and every missed interception pointed back to one ugly truth. The Chinese defense systems didn't work. They failed when it mattered most. And in doing so, they exposed a weakness that every country watching, especially Iran, took note of. When the dust settled, the world watched as India declared mission accomplished. According to Indian officials, every objective was met. Several high-value terrorist training camps were obliterated. Dozens of militant leaders eliminated, most of them with deep operational ties to attacks inside Kashmir. But there was something different about this strike. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't indiscriminate. It was surgical. India emphasized that this was not a declaration of war, but a precise retaliation against the perpetrators of terror. To back it up, New Delhi released drone footage, missile strikes captured in real time, hitting their targets with pinpoint precision. The message was clear. India had the reach, the capability, and the restraint. Across the border, Pakistan responded with denial and deflection. Initial statements claimed their forces had been alert. That damage was minimal. That Indian jets never made it deep into their territory. But facts have a way of surfacing. Within days, satellite images began circulating. Destroyed buildings, craters where radar installations once stood, burned out vehicles at militant headquarters. And then, something even more damaging happened. Pakistan's own military leadership, in closed briefings and eventually in leaks, admitted that their Chinese-supplied air defense systems had underperformed badly. And this admission caused shockwaves, not just in Islamabad, but in Beijing. Because behind the scenes, China had been running an information war of its own. Chinese state media launched a propaganda blitz, insisting the HQ-9 systems had worked, that Pakistan's response was sufficient, and that any failures were exaggerated by Western media. And while the truth was still unfolding, Chinese outlets pushed another narrative. That Dassault Aviation, the French company behind the Rafale jets used by India, had exaggerated performance stats. The goal was to tank its stock price. And it worked, temporarily. But this was just one half of China's plan. The other was to boost confidence in its own defense sector. Chinese defense stocks surged, rising nearly 36% on the back of carefully curated news coverage and government-backed optimism. Then came the unraveling. As independent analysts, foreign journalists, and satellite firms confirmed the scale of Pakistan's defense failures, confidence collapsed. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions. Were the HQ-9s really as good as advertised? How could multiple batteries fail so completely? And more importantly, if Pakistan's defenses failed, what about Iran's? By May 13th, the day the ceasefire was declared, the China Aerospace and Defense Index began to slide. Fast. In just a few trading sessions, it plunged by 8 to 9%, wiping out billions of dollars in market value. And Beijing couldn't spin its way out of this one, because the numbers told the story. And the lesson was painful. The Chinese defense industry had just suffered its first real battlefield test in a modern conflict against a capable adversary. And it failed spectacularly. The financial fallout began almost immediately. Avic Chengdu Aircraft Corporation, the Chinese manufacturer behind Pakistan's J-10 and JF-17 fighter jets, watched its stock price nosedive. On May 12th, shares were trading around 95.86 yuan. By the end of the month, they had plunged to 76.70 yuan, a devastating loss of over 20% in just 2 weeks. But it didn't stop there. Zhuxiao Hongdao Electronics, a key supplier of China's advanced missile systems like the PL-15, also took a hit. Their stock fell between 6 and 9%, with investors rapidly pulling out of Chinese defense stocks amid growing doubts about their battlefield reliability. And yet, amid this massive humiliation, something strange happened. Pakistan didn't turn on China. In fact, it was China that turned on Pakistan. Behind closed doors, Beijing was furious. Chinese defense analysts and military officials didn't blame their own technology. They blamed Pakistan's military personnel. They claimed that poor performance wasn't the result of defective weapons, but of inadequate training, sloppy protocols, and failure to follow proper operational guidelines. In public, Chinese state media stayed mostly silent. But in diplomatic circles, the message was loud and clear. This wasn't our fault. This was yours. Beijing's embarrassment was profound. For years, China had been positioning itself as a global arms supplier, ready to compete with Russia and the West. It had pushed weapons across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, touting them as cutting-edge, affordable, and battle-tested. But now, in the eyes of the world, those weapons had been tested, and they had failed. Even worse, China pressured Pakistan to bury the evidence. Sources close to the Pakistani military reported that Chinese officials demanded Islamabad destroy wreckage, withhold after-action reports, and refuse access to third-party analysts. Beijing was terrified, not of India, but of losing credibility in the global arms market. The truth was radioactive. If word got out that the HQ-9 couldn't stop low-flying cruise missiles, if allies started questioning the effectiveness of Chinese radar systems, then China's multi-billion-dollar defense export pipeline was at risk. But no amount of blame shifting, censorship, or intimidation could hide the obvious. The world had seen what happened. So had Iran. Tehran, like Pakistan, had invested heavily in Chinese air defense systems. And in theory, they were designed to repel Israeli jets, drones, and cruise missiles. But after what happened in Pakistan, there was a clear warning. Don't count on China to save you. And yet, as history would show just weeks later, Iran failed to learn the lesson. Now here's the part that should truly worry Beijing. The same radars and missile systems that failed so publicly in Pakistan, they're not just exports. They're also deployed across China's own military bases, guarding some of the most sensitive regions along its contested borders. Take the JY-27 radar system, for example. It was one of the first to be destroyed in the Indian strike on Pakistan's Chennai Air Base. Indian jets took it out with ease, firing anti-radiation missiles that turned it into scrap before it could even register a threat. And guess what? That same JY-27 radar is stationed by the PLA near Pangong Tso Lake, high in the Himalayas, directly opposite Indian positions in eastern Ladakh. In other words, India now has first-hand combat experience dismantling China's own defenses. They know how the system works. They know its blind spots. And they've demonstrated, not once, but multiple times, that they can punch right through it. And this isn't just theory. It's history. Let's rewind to February 2019, just days after the Pulwama terror attack. Indian Mirage 2000 fighter jets crossed into Pakistani airspace at low altitude and struck a Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist camp in Balakot. The Pakistani radar systems, Chinese-supplied, modern, and supposedly cutting-edge, never saw them coming. The jets hit their targets, returned home. No losses. It was the first major red flag that something was deeply wrong with Pakistan's Chinese-built defenses. But instead of pivoting to better systems or demanding performance guarantees, Islamabad doubled down. They bought more Chinese hardware, trusting that future upgrades would fix the gaps. They didn't. In fact, by March 2022, things got even worse. That's when an Indian BrahMos cruise missile, completely unarmed and fired accidentally, flew deep into Pakistani airspace. It crossed hundreds of kilometers before finally crashing near Mian Chanu. And not a single Pakistani radar system tracked it in time. Not one Chinese-made missile battery fired a shot. The intruder simply drifted in and out, unhindered. Think about that. A cruise missile, even by mistake, broke into sovereign airspace during peacetime. And no Chinese-supplied system even noticed. It was a warning shot from the gods. But both Islamabad and Tehran ignored it. Because here's the irony. If these systems couldn't stop a peacetime mistake, what hope did they have in a real war? The failure wasn't just tactical. It was systemic. And China, the proud exporter of these systems, was now facing a reckoning. Because for the first time, its own technology was being field-tested and failing in live combat. Worse still, the Indian military had just written the playbook for neutralizing China's defenses. They had already proven it in 2019, 2022, and now again in 2025. The writing was on the wall. But the question now became much bigger. If Indian pilots could do this to Pakistan's airspace, could they do it to China's too? And could Israel do it to Iran, relying on the exact same strategy? History had already answered that question. And in the next chapter, Iran would find out the hard way. Some analysts believe the Indian BrahMos missile incident wasn't a simple accident. They suspect it was a deliberate test, a silent, surgical probe of Pakistan's Chinese-supplied air defenses. And the results were damning. At first, Islamabad tried to save face, claiming that their Chinese-made radars tracked the missile from launch to impact. But that only made things worse. If they really tracked it, why didn't they try to intercept it? Why were no emergency response units deployed? Why was the world left wondering whether this was an attack, a mistake, or a complete systems breakdown? These weren't minor technical glitches. They were blinding red flags. It suggested that the billions Pakistan spent on Chinese radar and missile platforms had bought them little more than metal boxes with blinking lights and false confidence. And India saw everything it needed to see. Fast forward to 2025, and New Delhi launched Operation Cylinder. With surgical precision, Indian jets and missiles flew right through the same defenses, striking their targets before Pakistan could even react. It was no longer just a failure. It was a blueprint, a battle-tested playbook for defeating Chinese systems. And guess who was watching closely? Israel. Just months later, Israel used the same tactics and the same weaknesses to cripple Iran's air defense grid, which, not coincidentally, was also built using Chinese radar, launch systems, and command networks. So now we have a disturbing pattern. When Chinese military hardware is pushed to its limits by skilled adversaries, it breaks down. But here's the bigger question. Was the problem really with the equipment, or the people using it? China's defenders love to blame poor training by Pakistani or Iranian operators. But there's a bigger issue brewing beneath the surface. Because if a war were to erupt between India and China, especially in the brutal terrain of the Himalayan border, we would finally see the People's Liberation Army, PLA, itself put these systems to the test. No scapegoats, no deniability, no third parties to blame. Just China, India, and raw, unfiltered truth. Would China's vaunted defense tech rise to the challenge? Or would it collapse under the same pressure that exposed Pakistan and Iran? That's not just a tactical dilemma. It's a strategic nightmare for Beijing. And that leads us to the core question. Why exactly did Chinese weaponry fail so catastrophically when it mattered most? The answer isn't just technical. It's political, economic, and deeply systemic. At the heart of it are a few uncomfortable truths. Stolen foreign designs masquerading as innovation. Corrupt procurement pipelines, where kickbacks matter more than quality. Shoddy quality control, with no real-world testing. And most dangerous of all, a complete lack of combat experience. Because you can build all the missiles you want in peacetime, but until they face a real enemy, you're flying blind. And that, as the world is learning, is exactly what China's defense empire has been doing for years. Now, let's go back to where we started. The uncomfortable truth about Chinese weapons. Most of them aren't born from cutting-edge innovation or decades of disciplined R&D. They're copies, hybrids, imitations. Instead of pouring billions into creating original systems from scratch, China takes a shortcut by stealing. For decades, Chinese intelligence has targeted highly classified military tech from countries like the United States, Russia, Israel, and even European defense contractors. Once the data is stolen, Beijing's engineers begin the slow process of reverse engineering. But here's the problem. Even after successfully stealing the blueprint, China often takes years, sometimes a full decade, to figure out how to reproduce it. And by the time that knockoff reaches the battlefield, the original version is already obsolete. But that's not even the worst part. Even when they do manage to build a copy, it rarely functions like the real thing. Because blueprints don't capture industrial finesse, material science, or decades of combat-tested feedback. Those are earned, not stolen. So what China ends up with is a shell, a lookalike system, something that resembles power but can't perform under pressure. Take the HQ-9 long-range missile system as a prime example. Beijing claimed it could rival Russia's S-300 or even America's Patriot missile defense system. It looked impressive on paper. Sleek launch tubes, high-altitude capabilities, multi-target engagement. But on the battlefield, in Pakistan, it failed. Not just once, multiple times. Against old Indian jets, against missiles that should have been intercepted. The HQ-9 proved to be more of a theatrical prop than a real shield. And that failure wasn't hidden behind technical jargon or buried in secret reports. It was exposed in full view of the world, on satellite feeds, in defense journals, and on the lips of every rival intelligence agency watching China's arms trade. Because when you promise your weapons can match superpowers, but they crumble under pressure, you don't just lose a contract. You lose credibility. And worse, you expose your own military's weaknesses. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most dangerous reality. If China's exported weapons are underperforming so badly, what does that say about the weapons they keep for themselves? Are they holding back superior technology? Or is the entire system hollow, built on copies of stolen tech that were never truly understood? Because when the next war comes, and it will, there won't be time to steal or study. There will only be time to fight. And right now, China's arsenal is raising more doubts than fear. And guess why China claimed the HQ-9 could rival the S-300 or Patriot? Because it literally is a Frankenstein built from both. The HQ-9 is a hybrid clone. Its core design stolen from the Russian S-300, with add-ons and interface elements borrowed from the American Patriot system. But here's the kicker. These aren't just mechanical blueprints you can photocopy. Systems like the S-300 and Patriot are the product of decades of refinement, real-world battlefield feedback, and deeply integrated code bases. We're talking millions of lines of software, precision-calibrated sensors, and tight integration between radar, command, and intercept systems. That's what China can't replicate. Because copying the outer shell is easy. But recreating the invisible glue that holds these systems together, that's where China hits a wall. And it's why their weapons collapse under combat pressure. And this failure isn't just limited to surface-to-air missiles. Let's talk jets. The J-11, China's frontline fighter, is basically a knockoff Sukhoi Su-27. They originally built it under license from Russia. But when the deal expired, China just kept building it. No permission, no new tech, just copy-paste. And when they tried to upgrade it on their own, they ran into major issues. From engine reliability to avionics malfunctions. But it gets worse. Take the J-15, China's supposed carrier-based multi-role fighter. You know how they built it? They got their hands on a single prototype of Russia's Su-33, which they quietly bought from Ukraine after the Soviet collapse. Then they reverse-engineered it from one aging airframe. But here's the problem. Carrier jets are some of the most complex aircraft in the world. They have to handle brutal takeoffs, violent landings, saltwater corrosion, and compact weapon loads. And the Su-33 was already a 1980s design, full of limitations. Trying to build a modern 5th-gen naval fighter from one old prototype is like trying to rebuild a space shuttle from a broken Lego model. So what did China end up with? The J-15, nicknamed the Flying Shark by Chinese media, but called the Flying Brick by military analysts. Too heavy, unreliable engines, poor range, weak sensors, and worst of all, terrible performance on carriers. In fact, China's own pilots have complained about it, and their naval operations remain severely limited because of it. So whether it's radar systems, missile platforms, or fighter jets, the pattern is the same. 1. Steal the design. 2. Build a low-quality copy. 3. Fail to upgrade it. 4. Watch it collapse in real combat. And the consequences of this approach? We'll explore them in the next section, because China's obsession with copying may just be its biggest military weakness. China's fighter jets aren't the only embarrassment in its arsenal. Let's talk drones, the battlefield game-changers of modern warfare. The Chinese were so desperate to match U.S. drone dominance that they started cranking out knockoffs of American models. Enter the Wing Long and the CH-4 Rainbow. Look at them side by side with the MQ-1 Predator and MQ-9 Reaper, and you'll see the resemblance is not a coincidence. They're almost identical on the outside, but inside, that's where things fall apart. At first, countries were thrilled. Why pay $15 million for an American drone when you can get a Chinese one for half the price? So places like Iraq and Jordan bought them in bulk. Then came the rude awakening. Iraq purchased several CH-4B drones, but within just a couple years, they were practically unusable. By 2019, only 1 out of 10 CH-4Bs was still flying. The rest? Grounded due to constant malfunctions, sensor failures, and lack of spare parts. Jordan had an even clearer response. They retired the entire fleet early and tried to sell the drones off like used junk. That's how unreliable they were. And this problem isn't isolated to drones. China's tanks, armored vehicles, missile systems, and even artillery are plagued by the same core issues. Weak engines, fragile electronics, poor build quality, nightmarish maintenance. They look modern, sure, painted in stealthy camo and paraded around during military shows. But when it comes time for real combat, they break, they miss, they fail. So while China keeps pushing exports of its shiny new toys, more and more countries are learning the hard way. You get what you pay for. And in China's case, you're paying for a bad copy of a good weapon. Let's not forget China's tanks and artillery, because the same pattern repeats there too. Take the Type 59 and Type 69 main battle tanks. These weren't designed by China. They were basically slightly modified Soviet T-54s and T-55s, tanks from the 1950s. Even the newer Type 99, which China loves to showcase as its modern heavyweight, isn't truly original. It borrows heavily from Russian designs like the T-80 and T-90, and patches and tech copied from Western systems, often with poor integration that creates more problems than solutions. The story's no different in China's rocket artillery systems. Look at the PHL-3 multiple rocket launcher. Sounds fancy, right? But it's basically a rebranded clone of Russia's BM-30 Smerch. Same layout, same specs, no real innovation. Just a new paint job and a Chinese flag slapped on it. But here's the core issue. Stealing blueprints is not the same as mastering the tech. China's weapons might look impressive on parade day, but underneath the surface, they lack the precision engineering, deep system integration, and combat-proven refinement that makes Western and Russian systems so lethal. Cloning tech gets you a shell, but without rigorous testing, advanced software, high-grade materials, and trained personnel, it's just that, a shell. And in the chaos of real warfare, that shell cracks. That's why, time and time again, Chinese military hardware collapses under pressure while its rivals thrive. But even if Chinese engineers manage to successfully copy a weapon, there's something else their systems almost always lack: resilience under real combat stress. And as we've seen in recent disasters in Iran and Pakistan, these shiny cloned weapons don't just underperform. They fall apart. Sure, they might look impressive in propaganda videos, lined up in formation, sleek and futuristic, but in actual battlefield conditions, they reveal their true nature. Expensive, hollow junk built for show, not for war. And that's only half the story. The other ticking time bomb inside China's defense sector is corruption. Even when they manage to steal and build something decent, corruption and poor quality control sabotage it from within. Want proof? In late 2023, U.S. intelligence reports revealed something absolutely jaw-dropping. Strategic missiles, yes, the kind that are supposed to carry nuclear warheads, were found to be filled with water instead of rocket fuel. Let that sink in. These weren't faulty practice rounds. They were active, live missiles meant to defend the country. And someone literally replaced the fuel with plain water. But it gets worse. The same intel reports uncovered entire missile silo fields, fitted with defective silo lids. Lids that would not open during a crisis. Meaning, even if the missiles were fueled and ready, they couldn't be launched. This wasn't just a glitch. It was a systemic failure caused by corruption, carelessness, and zero accountability. Imagine what that says about the state of China's military preparedness. If even their strategic deterrent, the last line of defense, is crumbling from the inside, what does that mean for the rest of their armed forces? Poor manufacturing standards have haunted Chinese weapons for years. Engines fail long before their supposed service life. Electronics shut down unexpectedly. Even armor plating has been reported to fall off mid-operation. And these are not rare incidents. Take Pakistan, for example. Their Air Force flies both Chinese JF-17 fighter jets and older American-built F-16s. Despite being newer, the JF-17s require far more maintenance. Pilots have even admitted that they trust the older F-16s more in live missions. And that's just one example. Several countries that received early batches of Chinese fighter jets reported an unusually high rate of crashes. These were not wartime losses. These were peacetime accidents, revealing deep flaws in design and assembly. So if China's own nuclear missiles were found filled with water, what do you think the quality of their export weapons looks like? This is a country that has not fought a major war in over 40 years. Their military hardware has never been truly battle-tested in modern warfare. In contrast, Western weapons, and even Russian ones, have seen real-world action. They have been pushed to the limit under fire, tweaked, upgraded, and refined through actual combat. Take the Russian S-300 and S-400 air defense systems in Syria. While they haven't completely stopped Israeli airstrikes, they have at least demonstrated some real-time success. Even outdated systems occasionally score hits. But Chinese systems? So far, they remain untested in high-intensity war. Their effectiveness is still a mystery. And in war, untested equals unreliable. And unreliable means defeat. And here's the final nail in the coffin. Chinese weapons don't just fail in theory. They fail in real life. Let's go back to the basics. Engines. They're supposed to last for years under combat conditions. But in Chinese-made vehicles and jets, they often break down well before their expected lifespan. Electronics? They shut off without warning. Navigation systems freeze. Targeting software glitches mid-mission. And armor panels? In some cases, they've literally fallen off vehicles during transit or training exercises. Yes, fallen off, like cheap body kits on a knockoff car. Need more proof? Just ask Pakistan's Air Force. Their pilots fly both American-made F-16s and Chinese JF-17 jets. And they've openly admitted it. The Chinese jets require way more repairs, more downtime, and constant maintenance. They may look shiny on the tarmac, but in the air, they're fragile and unreliable. And that's not just a one-off case. Early batches of Chinese fighter jets exported to other nations had sky-high crash rates. That's not just unfortunate. That's a red flag the size of a runway. Now ask yourself, if China's own strategic missiles, the weapons meant to defend its very existence, were found filled with water, what level of quality control do you think goes into the stuff they export? The only reason China has kept this charade going is because it hasn't faced a real war in over 4 decades. Their weapons look good in parades, not in war zones. Compare that to Western weapons and even Russian systems. These have been stress-tested in real battles, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, from Iraq to Syria. For instance, the Russian S-300 and S-400 air defense systems deployed in Syria haven't stopped Israeli airstrikes completely, but they've still shown some operational success. Even outdated defenses occasionally get a lucky hit. China's systems, on the other hand, still untested, still unproven, and when push comes to shove, possibly dead on arrival. Here's a brutal reality check. Back in 1999, during the Kosovo War, a 1960s-era Serbian missile system, yes, a dinosaur by today's standards, shot down a U.S. stealth 117 Nighthawk, the so-called invisible jet. Now compare that to what China's modern missile systems have achieved in Iran or Pakistan. Nothing. Not even a lucky hit. Despite all the hype, the Chinese radars and air defenses completely failed under pressure. Zero results. Zero credibility. So here's the question. Why do countries like Iran and Pakistan keep buying these weapons? The answer isn't military. It's political, and it's dirty. In both Iran and Pakistan, military procurement is often tied to backroom deals, personal gain, and political convenience. And China knows exactly how to play that game. Chinese arms deals rarely come alone. They're bundled with sweeteners, loans with few strings attached, mega infrastructure investments like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and quiet, behind-the-scenes favors in the UN or regional diplomacy. To struggling governments desperate for cash and politicians hungry for kickbacks, these deals are hard to resist. Meanwhile, for China, this isn't just about profit. It's about power. Beijing isn't content being a regional bully. It wants to be a global military superpower. And weapons exports are a key part of that plan. In fact, China is now the fourth largest arms exporter in the world. But here's the twist. Recent disasters in Iran, Pakistan, and even inside China's own missile force have begun shattering that illusion. Buyers are asking harder questions. Defect rates are rising. And the global reputation of Chinese military tech is now hanging by a thread. China's dream of becoming a global military powerhouse just hit a brutal reality check. After watching their weapons fail spectacularly in actual combat zones, many potential buyers across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East are beginning to hesitate. The once glowing promises of cheap, powerful alternatives to Western arms are starting to look like a risky gamble. And the fallout isn't just international. The real damage is hitting inside China. President Xi Jinping has made military power a core pillar of Chinese national identity. His speeches constantly repeat the same phrase, a world-class military by mid-century. It's more than just strategy. It's personal. Every broken radar, every missile filled with water, every failed system in Pakistan or Iran undermines Xi's entire narrative. It's not just about defective hardware anymore. It's about credibility. And that credibility is cracking fast. Yes, Beijing will likely go into damage control. They'll launch new reforms, fire more generals, announce stricter inspections. But let's be honest, China has said all this before, and nothing truly changed. Because to build reliable, battle-proven weapons, you need more than just factories and blueprints. You need transparency, real accountability, and leadership willing to confront the rot instead of hiding it. China absolutely has the resources to build a formidable military. But here's the hard truth. They won't change until a real war forces them to. And by then, it might be too late. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more brutally honest insights the mainstream won't show you. This is Combat Insight Alpha, where truth hits harder than propaganda.